Welcome everyone to another community show, the ABCs of Crosswalks, Understanding Their Purpose and Use. This was very much of a popular session. I remember when we had to cancel this a few months back, and I had 3 or 4 people ask for it to actually come back. So here we are, and really excited to get this one. We have Dmitry Blinov. He's a principal product manager here at Reltio. He's been on several shows, and so we're welcome back, Dmitry. Glad to have you again. The rules of the show is as usual. Keep yourself on mute. All questions should be asked in chat, or feel free to take yourself off mute. We will be recording this show and post it to the community. And once, hopefully I have that out by tomorrow, I'll make sure to send the link and everything else to everyone. And upcoming shows, we have today's show on the ABCs of Crosswalks. We have a very interesting show on the 29th with Fresh Gravity on MDM for R&D and IDMP compliance for life sciences companies. And then on the 13th of July, we have Leading Your Strategy with Business Outcomes. And then we have a show on leveraging pre-trained machine learning models for efficient entity resolution. And then lastly, Reltio is sponsoring an event called Data Driven. It's going to be on October 3rd through 5th. It's a modern data management conference. So it's going to be an industry-specific conference with lots of really great speakers, industry leading speakers, and lots of real life kind of case studies, specifically from these different companies like AbbVie, Google, First Tech, Fulton Bank, and a lot more. So make sure you sign up. I'll put the link in the comments here shortly. I'm going to stop sharing, Dmitry, and let you kick it off.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. And I'll start sharing in a moment. Okay, let me see if you can see. Let me know if you can see my screen.
I can see your screen.
Okay, I'll switch to the slideshow. So today's topic is the ABCs of Reltio Crosswalks, and the purpose of the show today, I think it's a follow-up from a lot of different discussions we had from the previous shows and within the product management and other teams, obviously. And you know, the crosswalks are in the heart of everything Reltio. Basically, Reltio Crosswalk is a principal concept. They're our data model, our data structure, our, you know, the entire process of the entity resolution is based on. Let me switch to the next slide. And today, the purpose of what we will, you know, of today's call, what we will try to achieve today is really talk about the ABCs, the baseline. So we're talking about the basics of something that is, you know, a bedrock of Reltio, that is very, very base. So what I'll try to do here is, you know, the final outcome is to show you, first of all, how Reltio, how Crosswalk is in the heart of Reltio, you know, processes, data, and everything. And with understanding the Reltio Crosswalk, the idea is, you know, it will, because it's growing through all the processes, all the services, all the data models, everything basically. You know, understanding the crosswalk is important, and it should enlighten everybody in terms of how everything works, because it's really based on the crosswalk, right? But also, you know, not to make it boring and just about the ABCs, I'll try to expand and we'll try to cover some topics that, you know, that follow up the basics of the crosswalk. So again, you know, Reltio unifies complex data, and this is the, you know, we do it in real time. We deliver trusted, high quality data. Basically, we create a golden record, a single source of truth for your data, right? So, you know, multiple data sources today, oftentimes businesses have been held back with, you know, data quality, data duplicated, addresses, phones, emails, other types of data not being cleansed, and so on and so forth. Lack of data in certain cases. So Reltio is in the center of data universe to cleanse, duplicate, and resolve the data and do much more. And as a result, basically, you know, bring value of your data back to you. So I'll try to focus today on a simple process of get your data in, get your data resolved, get your data out, We'll talk about performance a little bit. We'll talk about overall entity resolution process. We'll talk about the UI. I'll show you, how the crosswalks are structured, how the data is structured within the crosswalks, what is crosswalk versus source, and things like that. So again, as I said, entity resolution is in the heart of the master data management, and crosswalk is in the heart of entity resolution. So basically, all the slide is showing is, the folded structure of how entity resolution enables multi-domain master data management, which enables segmented master data management, such as entity 360, customer 360, and so on, and so on and so forth. And it's all based on principles of crosswalks and attributes. So if you look at, we discussed this process already about maybe more than a year ago when we were talking about operational value resolution, but this is where the magic starts. This is where the entity resolution starts. So if you talk about entity resolution process real quick, say you have two different entries that came from two different sources, right? And those really are the same record, just came from two different sources, and that's clearly a data duplication. Simplified down to, you have several crosswalks in this case, and I'll explain it more, but in this case, you just have several entries, a couple of entries from each source. You have entity A came from source A, entity B came from source B, or record A, record B, right? The platform would indicate that eventually those two records are the same record and merge them for you, right? So we're not focused here on the fact of how merge will happen. Just to mention, it may happen by crosswalk or by match rule, right? So if two records have the same crosswalk, and crosswalk is uniquely defined, again, we'll talk about that, but uniquely defined by type or source and ID, and there are slightly other ways to uniquely identify crosswalks. I'll explain more about this, but if you have the same crosswalk or unique crosswalk present in two records, immediately they'll merge. Otherwise, they'll merge by match rules, which is more complicated, but at the end of the day, they will merge. And how do you get a golden record or single record, right? So you'll have a winner entity A, so that's your final record. It will have all of the crosswalks present in all of the records. And because all of these crosswalks contain the attribute value for the same attribute, which is in this case first name, just for example, maybe it's an individual type of an entity, right? One of the four different values that came from four different crosswalks should win. So in this case, the value from the crosswalk B1, attribute value B1, that's your winner, that's your operational value, and this is what you will see in the profile. And going further down, one level down, how would platform define which one should win, right? Well, this is based on the operational value calculation, and there is a huge now. Chris created, there was like 5 different webinars on operational value calculation, end to end, the complete guide, and Chris now created in our community the separate page, separate portal for every operational value. So I'm not going to, spend much time on this today, but basically based on how operational value is calculated, last update date, most frequent value, whatever else, the final operational value is defined. So in this case, for the first name, Mike was defined as operational value. And this way, attribute by attribute, crosswalk by crosswalk, right? Operational values will be defined for all of the attributes in the entity, and here you go, you got your golden record. It is a very simplified explanation, very much simplified explanation, but this is in the core of it, right? This is how it works. So now, what is crosswalk in this specific case? So I kind of already, this is why I started with sources and everything. So crosswalk represents the data that came from different sources. We'll talk more about that, but in my own words, crosswalk is a structure, is a separate data structure within the entity record or relationship record basically within your data object, which represents a specific entry of a source, not source as a whole, but specific entry of a source. So you can have multiple crosswalks from the same source, multiple entries from the same source. and it represents or links or contains, we just use different words for it, but or contributes to. We have these are three most popular: links, contains, or contributes to the specific attribute values within this entity. So going to the next slide now. This is how the entity is structured, like super simplified the structure of the entity. This, what I represented here, can form an entity already. So you have a single crosswalk. For whatever reason, I decided that will be Reltio cleanser crosswalk. And crosswalk is uniquely defined, as I already mentioned, by just two attributes. Crosswalk type, which represent the source, in this case it's Reltio cleanser, can be anything, and I'll show you now data modeler, how it is, how it's done, how it's added, how it's deleted, and how you add it to the model. But basically in your model, you add a new source type or crosswalk type, and each entry of the source is a crosswalk. And second parameter which identifies crosswalk uniquely is crosswalk URI. So just have this two. You cannot have two pairs of these parameters in the entire tenant that have the same values. So you cannot have twice Reltio cleanser with crosswalk URI presented here, this 009RQK27, whatever, it's after generated. So it's always URI, like hash type thing, right? If you have two of them, they will merge immediately. There's a corner case, we'll talk about this related to quotas and limits here, but overall you cannot have two crosswalks the same type, the same ID or URI. It will merge. By the way, crosswalk URI is, I called it crosswalk URI here. Really, it's crosswalk ID. I'll talk about this when I'll start showing the UI in a minute. I'll show you exactly, right? So crosswalk ID is the right name for it right now. And you have attribute values here tied to this specific URI. So highlighted in the bold blue here is the entity ID. This is how it all forms a single entity. So they are tied to a single entity. This is an entity ID. So obviously the crosswalk and the attributes would have the same entity ID. They all form the same ID. And this attribute here is attribute phone, format mask, whatever. And there's this URI of the value. So this is a URI of the value versus the URI of the attribute itself. There's this URI of the value, this URI of the value. So now let's go to the entity and I'll show you to the UI, sorry, and I'll show you there better. The slide need to be corrected. Here I should have, in addition to crosswalk URI, I should have crosswalk ID, and crosswalk ID and crosswalk type pair is what forms the unique crosswalk, right? So that's my profile, just everything about me. I have my source view here. Source view contains all the crosswalks for this entity, right? And I can specifically highlight. Let me switch to the crosswalk view first. And I can specifically highlight, show me all the values. Here are the attribute values, while here are the attributes. So let's switch to the first name. It's always easy. Plenty of first names always, right? A full name in this case. Show me. Where's my crosswalk? Yeah. Show me everything from this crosswalk only, right? So I can highlight the source, and it will highlight the values associated with the source. Now let's look at the structure of the entity as it is present in the JSON. So basically this is my entity, right, structured as a JSON. I have all of my attributes here in this section, and I'll have all of my crosswalks here in this section. So let's look at the crosswalks first. And this Reltio cleanser crosswalk is what I used as an example, but maybe I'll open this Octa crosswalk as another example, right? So we'll talk about the anatomy of the crosswalk, what it contains, all the attributes in a minute. But before I go there, this is how attribute values are contained or linked to this specific crosswalk. This is how platform knows these attribute values and can highlight for in UI, for example, attribute values came with this specific crosswalk. They are all stored here in the attribute section within crosswalk, right? And each of the value has a unique URI. And if I go back to the values, like let me find something for the name. Yeah, so this name value here, right? If I go back to the attributes now, and for the name, yes, I can find this exact URI for this value. Now, obviously, I can have other values for this attribute, but this one is associated with.
So how do we know which is an operational value from the crosswalk? Is
Very good.
zero the
Very good question. I'll have a slide about this. Okay, so we'll get there. Again, operational value calculation is a whole, not one, but 5 different webinars that we did, but I'll talk about this specifically, right? I have a couple of slides on that actually. For now, one comment I'll make is operational value is always calculated on the fly. So it's been calculated when we fetch the record from the database and showed it in the UI. In the database, we never store the operational value. It's always calculated on the fly. So in this regard, now talking about the data structures, how crosswalks and attribute values are tied together, you can ignore operational value completely there because all values matter in this case. Moreover, you can have different permissions and different people with different permission sets will have different OV calculated from the same entity, right? Now we're talking about one level below. This one level below is how the entity is structured and how the crosswalk is forming the entity. You saw my diagram. Now I'm showing you how it happens here and how it is basically reflected in the UI, for example, right? So if I open the crosswalk here, I'll see things like ID for Reltio crosswalk, and this is why my slide stands true still for the Reltio type of crosswalk. Let's talk about Reltio type of a crosswalk for a minute because it's a special type of a crosswalk. First of all, it is always created by Reltio platform. You can post it, but if you can also send a piece of data without any crosswalk. If platform receives such piece of data, it will create a crosswalk for it, and it will be Reltio crosswalk. Everything you create from UI, therefore, right? Because when you create something from UI, if you don't define, if you don't point to a specific crosswalk, and I'll show you how it's done as well, you can do that as well. But if you don't do that, Reltio platform will assign a crosswalk to it, and it will always be a Reltio type of a crosswalk. So in this case, Reltio is a source, right? Reltio is a source for this data. Other important things are ID value. So why my slide stands true for Reltio type of a crosswalk? ID value is being assigned from the entity ID. So because we create a crosswalk, we need to understand what will be the ID for this crosswalk. The source we know is Reltio. Data was created within Reltio. It didn't came from somewhere outside. How do I understand the ID? Well, it's obviously entity in this case because I created this within this entity, right? If you post, you can also post sometimes other types of crosswalks, other sources basically without the ID. In this case, the entity ID will be used as well. I think it should be enabled on the tenant level, such behavior, but just other important things here obviously create date, update date, and Reltio load date. There is always a question: what is the difference between these three? I'll explain that. So we'll get there in a moment. Let's go back to my guidance slide so I understand what I wanted to talk about next.
Can I ask a couple of questions, Dmitry?
Yep. All
right. And you might have answered this, but does crosswalk URI become an OV URI?
No. I understand this is a complex topic. This is basics, this is ABC, but this is a complex topic, right? So you know what, before I answer this question, let me go through the slides because I think I should be able to, by that slide number 13, I think I should be able to form the picture in everybody's mind that kind of answers this question by itself, right? Because really, let's do that. If it doesn't work, I'll try to explain.
So it would be good to review how a cleanser determines which source crosswalk it will process. So for example, there are 4 phone numbers from various sources populating the raw phone field. How does the phone cleanser choose which one to grab and process?
It always, it always processes operational values as far as I know, but there may be configurations to that. And again, what you use as an operational value, because in all cases, it makes sense to use the Reltio cleanser itself as operational value, right? Otherwise, why would you cleanse? Not always the case, but in most cases it is. So it would also cleanse everything new that came in. Reltio cleanser is one big separate huge topic, right? I didn't, that's, that goes beyond ABCs of Crosswalks. We can do a show about that, but
yeah, it's a good point. And here's some basics then. Can you explain the difference in the views in the legend? So, crosswalk, source, and contributor.
Yes, let me jump to that slide real quick, and then we can go back. And yes, that's I think this slide. So we have three different types of view in the source view, right? The crosswalk view displays different crosswalks, or as I already said, entries of the source, right? So in this case, I can have multiple Reltio crosswalks or multiple Octa crosswalks. Let's use Octa as an example here. If I have two Octa crosswalks, the crosswalk view will highlight them, these two different crosswalks with different colors. Here, I think I selected contributors, so you can see they're all the same color. But if I would use crosswalk, and I'll show you in a moment, they'll all be highlighted in these different colors. So I'm showing the data on the crosswalk level, which is an entry of the source, right? And I can have multiple entries from the same source. They're still different. So the crosswalk is what we're talking about here. This is this base level. The source view shows me the legend here on the source level. Source, you can think of it equals crosswalk type. MedPro, Dun & Bradstreet data, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the source of your data is, that is a source, or that is the crosswalk type. In this case, Octa is a source for the data, that is a crosswalk type, and that is a source. When I switch to the source view, it showed me all the sources. It basically starts to highlight, and it's highlighted here on the side, all the different sources as separate. Now, is there anything else? Yeah, so color coding is different now. Color coding is based on the source level. Every Octa will be one color, every Reltio will be another color. The contributor view displays contributor findings. Now, contributor is a group of crosswalks, a single crosswalk that forms a separate entity. I started with entity resolution slide, and in my slide, if I go back real quick, you see that originally these two, they were two different entities, right? Entity A and entity B. So these two crosswalks, A1 and A2, are contributors to entity A, while crosswalks B1 and B2 are contributors to entity B. And even after the merge happened, within the winner entity, I can still see the contributors. And I can actually use this button here to unmerge them back to being separate entities. So this is effectively how, so when I switch to crosswalks, I see crosswalks in different colors. When I switch to source, I see sources. Do I have same sources? You see the problem is I don't have, well, if I assign some value to this crosswalk, if I would have any, like if I would have Reltio with value here, that doesn't have value, so it's some different color. But if I would assign a value here, let me check if I can real quick do that. Like if I, it'll be interesting. So let me actually try and do that. So I'll go here.
And what is this dependent crosswalks?
Yes, so we'll talk about that as well in the data load section. But I can already tell you that crosswalks can play a data source role or a contributor role. So contributor, we talked a little bit about it, right? Now I can attach more crosswalks of different sources, different types to this contributor. So I have a single contributor here, and I attach this crosswalk as a data source for this contributor. So I basically say during my data load, I basically say, and I can do it here. So I have a slide about it as well, but since we started talking about it, I can mark my crosswalk in the data loader. I can do the same through API. So it's documented. I didn't didn't copy paste the documentation here for specifically for post entities, but you can find it there. If I might mark my crosswalk, this is crosswalk section here for data loader. As data provider, that indicates that the attributes I mapped here, and I'm going to load into my system, they are linked to this crosswalk exactly as I showed you here. This URI thing that basically this value comes from this crosswalks. This is the data provider crosswalk. Data contributor can be in this specific data load, in this specific data load process. Data contributor provided can be not a data provider by itself, can have 0 attributes attached to it, but that's a crosswalk that already exists in the system. And I say, well, everything that comes from this data load should be attached to this crosswalk, right? So in this case, I made data quality employee source to be a data provider, while Reltio data cleans is a contributor to it. Okay. I hope it makes sense, but again, it's, we with ABCs of Crosswalks today, the expectation is we'll touch base on a ton of deep topics. You can do a show from every topic like this. You can to have a separate show about contributors. You can have a separate show about data cleansers. And I'm trying to stay on a higher level and explain this, so it's clear. I hope it is clear, but if not, we can have a separate session for questions. But yeah, let me try and go back to my agenda. And let's talk about the anatomy of the crosswalk itself, right? What is in the crosswalk? So we saw the URI already. So the type is the source, as I already mentioned. So always, and I'll show you how the new crosswalk is added to the system, how the new source is added to the system. And oftentimes you would name the source, the actual name, right? So if you have a Metro data for pharma, for example, for pharma domain use case, you'll name the source Metro, and it will be a Metro type crosswalk. The value of the crosswalk should, uniquely identifies the crosswalk. You can have the same ID for 2 different crosswalks if they have different type. So 2 different types of the crosswalk can have the same value. Type and value form, I should highlight them they form the unique crosswalk. Now, there is a source table here. This is optional property, but if you use that, you can use it as an additional separator, because source table, when it participates in the crosswalk, it further differentiates these crosswalks from others. So if you have a crosswalk with the same type and the same value, but 2 crosswalks with the same type and the same value, but one of these crosswalks, in addition, have a source table with some value and another does not, those are still 2 different crosswalks. So you can use source table as an additional differentiator for that, like an additional level of granularity. The URL of the crosswalk, we discussed that. That's actually different from the value, and I'll fix my slide. Attribute URIs, we've been through that in this section, but let me go back to this because not necessarily, it's easy to capture what I'm doing here. So if that's, by the way, this represents the entire entity, everything I have here on the left hand, right? So I go to the crosswalk section again. I open my crosswalk Reltio cleanser, this is my favorite apparently. So I'll always open that. And I have the URI, and I'll have all the attributes here. And I wanted to talk about attribute URIs exactly. Yeah. So I have my attribute URIs in the attribute section of the crosswalk. This is how, going back here, this is how attribute values, this is how platform knows that this specific attribute value is tied to the specific crosswalk, right? And then there are all the dates. That's very important as well. So let's talk about.
Excuse me, can you just go back to your previous slide, which you showed the entity, not
Yeah.
the other one, slide 7.
Slide 7 here. Okay.
Yeah. So my question is, this entity, the 369, that is stored in the database, right? The crosswalk URI.
Yes. Yeah. All that is stored in the database. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll have a slide about this as well. We'll go there again. I promise by slide 13, most of these questions will disappear. I know I'm, kind of dancing around this, but let's get there, and it's just a broad topic. So the dates. Now we have all these key attributes of the crosswalk. Any crosswalk would have this. Obviously, some of them are optional. This is like typical crosswalk. Now all the dates. Crosswalk has a lot of important dates that drive a lot of different processes. Reltio load date is a date when this crosswalk was updated last time using Reltio API. So whenever you update the crosswalk, Reltio load date will get updated. And you cannot, the important piece here about the Reltio load date, you cannot modify that manually. You can just, it reflects the actual update date. I'll explain why it's important. Create date reflects the first time crosswalk created. Simple as that, doesn't change since then. You just, you can define it in your data load when you first time load the crosswalk, or you can just skip it and platform will assign it whatever the current time is. And now there is a question whether it's local time and UTC time. I'll clarify that. I just realized as I was talking, I didn't capture this in this slide. Update date also reflects the last time you updated the entity, but update date is different. Update date, first of all, you can assign it to whatever you want, right? You can actually define it in your data, and you can even make it different from the actual time of the data. Next thing is it's optional. So normally we recommend not to use it, and platform will assign it. Why is that? Is because when you load your data to the platform, on each entry you load, a delta will be calculated. And delta calculation is something different. It's a separate topic. I'll touch base on that specifically on a slide further. But the delta oftentimes can be calculated as zero or none or empty, right? So basically you posted a piece of data to your existing tenant, to your existing data set, platform resolved it, and it realized that there is no actual difference between what you posted and what it is in the entity already, in the platform already, in the specific entity, right? If this delta is empty, update date will not be updated, and actually there will be no data persistency happening. It will basically skip this update. Now, if you force the update date and put it in your update, platform always, doesn't matter if delta is empty or not, platform always will trigger the next version. So it will calculate whatever you posted as an actual update. That might lead to, I have this picture basically. So you'll have multiple, so this is history. I want to talk about that as well. But basically you'll have multiple entries which didn't really change anything in the entity, but in the history, they all reflected as separate entries. Obviously, this is not recommended. I recommend to leave it up to the platform to calculate the data and decide whether the date was updated. There was actual update, and update date, is different or not. But you have all these options.
So one question.
Yep.
So Reltio load date is the first original date when an entity is loaded in Reltio, right?
No,
an update date.
No. Create date. I should switch them. Probably create date is original date where data was loaded. The crosswalk was loaded to Reltio. Load date is when you're right. Data was loaded to Reltio. Maybe for existing crosswalk already, but the new piece of data through partial rewrite, for example, you just attach new attribute values to this existing crosswalk. Crosswalk exists for a week already. The create date will be a week ago. Reltio load date will be right now. You loaded the piece of data to this crosswalk. Reltio load date will be updated. Yes. Update date is something you can control. You can force it. You can make it something different. That's the difference between this and this. Sorry, I interrupted you, but I thought I captured your question. So hopefully I did.
Yeah, and that's what my understanding. For example, if the entity is loaded, and if I'm making any change to any attribute, then Reltio platform will automatically update the update date based on that timestamp.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. So delete date. Delete date is important as well. By default, it's empty. It's not set. But if you set it, and you can actually set it back in time, or you can set it in the future, into the future. If you set, this is what we, it will trigger the process we call end dating of the crosswalk. When the crosswalk has a delete date, which is in the past, if it's in the future, it's kind of, it's a timer basically, right? It's not a time bomb, but it is a timer. So in the future, this crosswalk will be marked as deleted automatically just when the day comes, right? You set some day, the day comes, the crosswalk will be marked as deleted. It will not go anywhere from the system. You will be still able to see it, but it will be marked as deleted. And all of its attributes associated to it will be marked as deleted as well. And what it means is they will never, from that point, they will never participate in operational value calculation. So they will never become an actual operational value, and they'll never form a golden record. So you can set up the delete date, if you know that the data from the source will become not actual anymore, not correct anymore from the specific date forward. Or you can even set it back in time and mark your crosswalk and attributes associated to it, like invalid, deleted, not operational anymore, right now, immediately, right? So this is what you can do with delete date, again, optional, but this is how you use it, and that's widely used. It's a very powerful thing. The important thing is the data doesn't disappear from anywhere, from the entity, from the history. It's all there. It's just marked as deleted, so never in your golden record. Source published date. Your optional property indicates the date when the crosswalk was published by a partner. You can use it as an additional indicator. So basically, that's a type of a date where it doesn't impact the data set itself, but you have an additional mark, in the data. So you want to know something more about the source in the upstream system, where your partners, published it there, you can keep it in the crosswalk. External information. An optional object describes information from external system. You can be just any string. You can add additional description. By the way, crosswalk itself has description as well, but you can have additional description regarding the external source. Keep it in the crosswalk as well. So source view, we've been through this. Really, what I wanted to show you is, how it's different from the. Let me go back to this. How it's different from the profile views. The profile view is your golden record, while source view you have these are all the operational values here, obviously, right? While sources view is all of the values tied to all of the crosswalks, and you can open any crosswalk, see how they contribute to each other, how they contribute to the entity itself, how they group by sources, and so on and so forth. Try and do that. How can I? Yeah, I don't know why, but I can. I was trying to do this like I did for this one. For this one, I know that I added it manually here. Why cannot I do this for this one? Okay, anyway, I was trying to add the crosswalk. The legend here also shows which crosswalk came first and how the merge happened. So Octet crosswalk came first and formed this entity, and others contributed to it later. So now I think we can switch to the history view. Yeah, history, activity log, and delta calculation. Delta calculation, I already touched base on it. There are some interesting points which are not widely known, and we need to do a better work on our documentation. So I'll talk about this. I'm sure it'll be interesting. But before I go there, something I just explained regarding the crosswalks, right? This is how this profile was originally formed. Let me switch to the slide mode again. So first, the date, the purple here, the date came from the octa, and then additional date came from Reltio and cleanser. Well, actually, cleanser, I think, is not reflected here. Yeah, so Reltio. So back in time, sometimes these two merged, and actually there is a match rule explaining how these two merged, these two crosswalks merged. And now from that point, history reflects operational values which are not from Octa, which are from Reltio in this case. Oftentimes Reltio is the winner. I'll talk about operational value calculation and what winner is. There was a question about that specifically. But what I'm trying to explain here is history reflects, each dot here reflects the version of the entity, and history is really built on the crosswalks, right? So you have this crosswalk, then this one got merged, then there was update to this crosswalk, and again update to this crosswalk, and a match rule was applied, but the data came from the same source. So the color here really shows the source rather than the specific crosswalk. So those maybe still different crosswalks, just the same source. And the delta, the difference between this state and this state here, relies on both attribute values and crosswalks. And this is actually the most realistic, most actual, I would say, reflection of the actual state of the entity, but also the state of the entity back in time. Now there's a delta calculation on the activity log level. Let's go back to the UI and I switch to the activity log, and it shows here how I think yesterday or today even I added the new attribute value to the first name. And what you can see here, what's interesting, it doesn't actually show the delta, right? It just shows that well, actually here it shows the delta. But in this deletion event, for example, doesn't show you the delta. It just shows you that, well, this attribute value was deleted. What became new operational value? You know, which source participated? None of them is reflected in activity log. That is because in activity log, the delta is calculated based on attribute values only. Crosswalk source level does not participate in the activity log delta calculation. You know, that's very important. That's not always well understood. And we can talk again another hour about this. I just wanted to highlight this. There are a lot of consequences to this, even to outbound streaming and things like that in certain cases. But just be aware of that. Important about crosswalks, going back to ABCs about crosswalks, while the history view is really based on crosswalks and values, so really reflects the actual state of the entity. Activity log just reflects how attributes changed, and it just ignores the crosswalks, right? So now going to the operational value calculation. There was a question how operational value is calculated. I had my two crosswalks. I need to understand which of the values will be operational value, right? In this case, I said I had first name from crosswalk A, first name from crosswalk B, and somehow platform decided that crosswalk B will be my operational value for the first name. It is based on the survivorship strategies. And why we are talking about survivorship strategies in the context of crosswalk is because there are two groups of survivorship strategies. One is attribute-based and another source-based, crosswalk-based. Only touch base today about on the crosswalk type of survivorship strategies. And again, there are a ton of materials about this even on community, but last update date is based on when my crosswalk was updated last time. Let's go here. It's interesting to see here real quick. So if I look at this crosswalk, let's actually look at another crosswalk. For example, Reltio, yeah, this one. I have attributes again. So you see how I have load date, Reltio load date, single attribute update dates, and there is none. And each attribute separately would have its own single attribute update dates, which is again empty here. Maybe I have something here. Let me check. Yeah, so here I have single attribute update dates for some of the attributes. So what is this all about, and how it's all related to last update date? The logic is next. If I have a single value or multiple values that came from this crosswalk, and none of these values of the attribute has its own single attribute update date, the update date for this value will be taken and calculated and taken into account for operational value calculation from crosswalk last update date. But if I have separate single attribute update date within this crosswalk, but just for subset of attributes, the scenario is I already have a crosswalk in my system with some values, and I use partial override I have 10 values attached to the crosswalk, and I use partial override to just update one of them. So the crosswalk update date will not change for other values, but it will change for this one value, right? Because this one value got updated. So this is how a separate update value, update timestamp will appear in the crosswalk for this attribute compared to the entire crosswalk. And last update, this strategy will use this date basically. So it will go. Let me check for the attribute. Attribute doesn't have its own personal update date. Let me go to the crosswalk then and use one from the crosswalk. Source system is interesting. I can just rate my source systems from most important to less important, make a list, right? And they'll be winning based on this list. If the attribute came from the most important source, it will always win compared to attribute that came from the least important source. All these values same as last update date, but so you will use the same timestamp logic, but the oldest will win, not the latest will win. Make values that came first to be winners, yeah, not in opposite to this one. Other attribute winner crosswalk and winner entity crosswalk. The most complicated ones, I'll just read what is written here, but because we kind of out of time and I wanted to get to more exciting stuff, at least last 10 minutes, but I want to talk about other attribute winner crosswalk a little bit. So this one, you can point one attribute.
Hey, Dimitri, can you put that in presentation mode, please?
Okay. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
Oh yeah, thank you. Please didn't realize I still talk about to talk on this on a smaller window. So I can point specific attribute. I can say last name should always win from the same source that first name wins, right? So my first name win from Okta or some other HR system. That means that my last name should always win from the same source. Period, right? As simple as that. Winner entity crosswalk is even higher level. Make all values of the attributes from the winner entity to be winners. So if I have two entities merged, as I already shown, right? Entity A, entity B, entity A1 means that all the attributes from this, all the attribute values from this entity, from this contributor, think on entities as contributor level. I'll talk about this in the next slide, how we store the data. We don't even store the entity. What we really store is crosswalks, attributes, attribute values, attributes, and data model, right? And we form the entity on the fly all the time. So every time we can consolidate the profile, we say, well, this one won, so all the attributes from this one should be operational values. Other attribute winner crosswalk, I wanted to touch base on this specifically. This is a pretty powerful tool that is used today in multiple scenarios. I can give you one from like, I don't know, insurance industry, for example, right? You have multiple sources. You don't necessarily know exactly which source is most trusted for you. So you don't go by source system in this case, because for different values, different sources may be trusted. And over time, you know that the data is cleaner in this source or better in this source. But for example, that whenever the license ID or agreement ID won from this source, all the other information then is actually like household, phones, first name, last name, organizations, whatever is attached to this agreement is also actual from the same source. So you will tell that if my agreement ID or license ID won from this source system, make my other key parameters, winning from the same source system. And this is one of the sophisticated type of operational value survivorship strategies that is based on the crosswalk. This is how crosswalk drive the operational strategies, right? So now knowing all that, and I know we will be jumping from topic to topic, but I think we still this time we still tied to the agenda, and I hope that the picture starts to form. How is my entity formed, right? How is my entity formed? How do I get my entity in my UI? How do I look at it and where crosswalk and all that? So you have your data model. I call it metadata here, but you really have your data model, and metadata is it's a little bit more than data model. But think of this entire blue square as your data model for simplicity. You define your entity types there, you define your attribute types there, and you define your crosswalk types there. You have data modeler for this. Yes, this is my data modeler. And you can actually, you don't need to go and modify the JSON file. I can actually do that. So here, for example, this is how I create a new source type. I just set a name, set a display name, it will be displayed in the UI. I set an icon for the source. I may set some abbreviation and description, right? I'll save it and my new source will appear in the system. This is how I added there. So I added my new crosswalk type, which is source. I have some attributes. I defined survivorship groups, right, which we just discussed. For attribute types, survivorship strategies, I have this metadata defined. Now I have my data stored. And my data, I really store the attribute values that came from different sources. I have sources themselves, and I have key space which contains all this data about these keys, URIs, these little things I highlighted here in bold blue, right? All this stored in system key space, which kind of matches it all together. So I load my data into the system and I structure it based on the metadata. And this is how my operational value and my entire entity is calculated and formed. And then I obviously show it in UI and API. And here you go, I have my entity, right, with some operational value. One important thing to stay for 30 seconds on this, for sources, we have column family separate tables. And when you have a separate table for a specific data structure, it is much faster to access it. And you can fetch data from the single data structure the most efficiently. So for sources, for crosswalks, we have a separate column family always for fast accessing. So any API that either use entity ID or crosswalk ID is the fastest to use, because if you use API which, like this compare search with the filter compared to search with the crosswalk ID. Search with the filter, you'll need to collect the data in multiple places. It takes time. Search with the crosswalk ID, there is special data structure within the data storage, which allows you to fetch the entire entity just by the crosswalk ID, quick, fast access, quick access type of a thing, type of a structure. We have that.
A question here, from the UI, can I see the crosswalk ID for a profile?
From the UI, crosswalk ID for the profile?
Yeah, in your slide 7, you had one, the crosswalk ID, which is coming from various sources. So I want to see the left one in slide 7. From the UI, is it possible to see?
You mean here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll add it. Yeah, again, this is I should have added here third, right? So it's important, the parameter. But the the crosswalk ID is just a parameter for crosswalk. It's not represented in the. I'll add it here definitely. Okay, so we talked real quick about the data modeler as well. So just so you know, we have data modeler. You can go there. You can not only add all the attributes and stuff like that. Create survivorship rules. You can also add your sources there to have, to add new sources to the system, have new crosswalks from this source system, right? There's not much to talk about that. I'll just stand it. Data load process. I'll skip this topic for now. I think I really covered the most important thing, which is data provider versus contributor provider. There is a post entities API. This is the core, most popular API we have, right? Read the documentation about it. You'll understand everything, how to use API to load the data. We have data loader shown here, and I opened it here. Well, here, yeah. So same thing, uses the same API. Just you have visual wizard here, so you can use that as well. For data load process, again, talking about crosswalks again, the most important piece is to cover data provider versus contributor provider here. Different APIs that use crosswalk. For the lack of time, I'll skip talking about this. The search, I'll just highlight this. The search API using object filter. We have a separate show, very good quality, very exhaustive, like everything search. We did with Pradeep in the beginning of this year. Refer to that, use that. get entity by crosswalk type of API is something that is used as fast access structure. So has a very good performance. Use it if you need to fetch data and the crosswalk type and ID. And we represent a new API here, just in this release. I'll not go deep into that, but please check in our documentation. Get by crosswalk connection is one of the aggregated APIs, new APIs that I present in this release, and it allows you to do graph type of a search with a limited depth, but based on the crosswalk. Very interesting. Just try it out. It's in our documentation right now. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about performance immutability of sources and surrogate crosswalks. Actually, I'll skip the performance. Again, we have the separate slide deck about it. Let's talk about immutable sources for a moment. And before I go there, real quick, we have different type of attributes, as you know, right? So I always keep the interesting part to the end, but whatever. You need to know the base, before we go to the interesting part. So we have simple attributes, nested attributes, but also, and it's important for crosswalks, we have reference attributes, right? So an example of reference attributes here is reports to, and the difference in the reference attribute is the reference attribute is always formed not only from the data in this particular entity. It looks like a nested attribute, but subnested there contains attributes from relation and from the end object or the object on the other side. And all these attributes then will have its own crosswalk, and those we call reference crosswalks, and they are not reflected or contained within the crosswalk block of the entity. They are always reflected and contained within the reference attribute of the entity. So just an important note here. Going back real quick to the immutable sources and when I want to talk about that. Our platform is event-based. There is a save record API from the data load, post entities API, record is saved, and now we start sending events to all the other services and storages. Some of them we touched based on like activity log, primary data store, history here, matching, and so on and so forth, right? And I'll need to send an event for each update, for each attribute, actually, each crosswalk I've just posted into this record save, right? So I formed an update, and in my history, you saw the dot. So the dot represents single update. I'll need to send an event. And I'll need to propagate it through all references and to the end objects. Oftentimes, and it impacts the performance, it impacts the overall system, it impacts the volume of events I generate from a single save event. Oftentimes, I don't need to propagate events because there is no actual change to the end object. The best scenario, the best example I always have is address type of an entity that has address relation to the location. When I change my address, I relocate from location A to location B. Location itself doesn't change, right? Location is a point on the map. So I switched from location 1 to location 2. My address changed, my location dot on the map, none of them didn't change. The previous one and the new one, they remain where they were. I don't want to propagate the additional, sometimes tens, hundreds, thousands of events to my locations. So I can mark, and right now by default in all newly provisioned tenants, they already marked by default sources for location as immutable. I didn't provide configuration example here. It's all in our documentation, so refer to our documentation. But just be aware that I can mark specific source, not crosswalk, but source of crosswalk type as immutable, meaning that when there is a different entity update, I want to skip propagation of events for this source from that entity. Like from organization, from HCO, I want to skip propagation of address change to location. So this is, this is on the source level. This is crosswalk feature. Does
Dimitri?
Yep.
We are out of time. So it sounds like there's maybe some opportunity to go a little bit deeper into this. Really great stuff. If you want to do that, maybe an Ask Me Anything
Yeah,
at some
Ask Me
point.
Anything would work perfectly, because really we can cover the last topic. Really, I didn't touch based on today's surrogate crosswalks, very well documented, right? So you can just read it. You don't need me to explain it, but that is a very cool feature of crosswalks as well. So I wanted to mention that as well.
Right.
We can do an Ask Me Anything session, and we can do a deep dive into that specifically there. Yeah.
Good. And Zafar mentions that, yeah, we need an advanced session. All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the community show. Please take the survey at the end whenever you leave. But I'll see some of you next week. And thank you, everyone, for coming. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, feedback is a gift. So any feedback and all feedback is helpful. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dimitri. And lots of interest in this area to where I think we should definitely go a little bit deeper, it seems. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.